Let's talk about how we document a use case. Because we've established that the use case is a mode of communication, we need to lay down some ground rules. Communication assumes that you have two parties, both of who understand the same set of basic rules. You have your vocabulary, you have your grammar, things like that. And if those don't fit together, communication becomes difficult. So let's make sure that we are talking the same language when it comes to documenting the use case. In use case terminology, we talk about the use case model. Use case model actually can be a little confusing because model and diagram are very often interchanged in our language. There is in use cases a very distinct difference. The use case model consists of a diagram as part of the documentation or the expression of how the use case is going to look, how it's going to work. So we have, first and foremost, the diagram, which is going to give us an idea, because diagrams, which are nothing really more than pictures that follow very stringent rules, diagrams communicate a lot more than words. They are able to express things that are very challenging or very difficult to express in words. Having said that, words are important too. Actually, we need to, in order for us to get down into the meat of the use case, to really understand the use case, we need to have a document or a use case specification. Some folks call this the use case document. Some people call it the use case template or use case specification. This is where the details are. This is where we talk about all of the different pieces of the use case. And surprisingly enough, in the use case universe, which is kind of an anomaly in this sense, the diagram is a lot simpler than the specification. The specification is a lot more variety in it, first and foremost, a lot of different things that different people would recommend putting into the use case specification. And that is fine because it has to fit your situation. We're going to talk about the use case diagram first, and a little later we're going to talk about the use case specification and how to capture what information that we feel is important in the use case specification. I mentioned earlier that there are different levels of detail for use cases, and I'd like to go into a little more detail about that. I'd like to give you some information as to what it is we exactly mean with that. If you look at the fact that you're going to initiate a project and you have determined you're going to be using use cases for a variety of reasons, for we hope all of the right reasons, at project inception, all you're really going to be able to do is start to identify some use cases. And in order to make sure that as you move forward in the decision-making process on this project, you know really what that use case is all about, you might create a thing called a brief. A use case brief is a very succinct, very short, brief as the word implies, description of what's going to happen in the use case. It's not structured, there's no formal components to it really. It should convey enough information for the people who are going to determine whether or not this use case should be implemented to make that decision. But it should be kept to a bare bones minimum, following the principles of lean, making sure that you're keeping the thing lean by not wasting time developing a lot of detail that nobody's going to need. The point in time when you make a business case, meaning you're trying to decide is this project go or no go, if the brief is insufficient, at that point you may have to create an outline. You may want to look at adding a little bit of detail, fleshing out the details around the brief. You might even think about giving some major steps that are going to be happening. Again, you're looking at this point only for enough information to be able to provide the decision maker with the go, no-go decision on this particular use case. Once we're ready to give up to the developers, where the developers can actually start to use the use case to program their applications, this is the point where you're going to need a lot more detail in what we call a step-by-step or a detailed use case. The use case is created when you have the solution is already been decided upon. So now you know that this use case is going to be part of the application. It's going to actually be implemented. This is where it is necessary and where it is worthwhile to start to flesh out details like all of the different variations that are within the use case we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. If you're working in a world where documentation is critical, meaning it may be mandated or it is important to have a good documentation, you may even get to the level of having what we call a full use case, and that is something that is very valuable for ongoing support of an application. whether you get to that level of detail or not. Actually, how far along you go in this drill down from brief to outline to step by step to full is an individual question for your project, for your organization, and for your group. So how you get to that, that's your question. We're going to give you some tips, tricks, and techniques for writing a good brief, writing an outline, writing step by step, and writing full. Okay, I mentioned the use case brief. Use case brief is very often associated with a level of detail that is commonly or often called a business use case. A business use case is a very high-level view of what the use case is going to be. The purpose behind the business use case is really to keep the problem separated from the solution and focusing on the business process independent of technology. So without worrying about what application software is being used or what database architecture, what infrastructure or anything like that, all we're worried about is what's in it for the business community. So the benefits of using a brief is, first and foremost, it helps to define the business area that is involved. For instance, the use case order goods obviously is going to be dealing with an ordering area, an order processing group, or a group that is in some way, shape, or form responsible for capturing what the customer wants. Focusing on the value to the business user, and again, because every use case has to provide value, by writing the brief at this level of detail, at the high level of detail, a very, very succinct description of what's going on, you can focus on making sure that whatever this use case is delivering, even in your brief, there will be value by the time the use case is complete. Once it's been implemented, it will provide value to the business user, to the person who is really footing the bill. It also helps the developers align their solutions with the business need. The better they understand what the business community is trying to achieve, the better they're able to come up with appropriate solutions that are based upon the responsibilities of that particular business area. Also helps them identify business priorities. Actually, if I was a product owner and you give me a set of business briefs, use case briefs in the business case structure, it would be a lot easier for me to look at that and define the business priorities for sequencing these use cases. Which ones do we need first? Which one is going to provide the value to the business community earliest? It helps to establish the business-oriented vocabulary, meaning using the terms in the brief that are coming from the business community, avoiding technology, avoiding the terms that are from the system department or from the IT department. We are much better able to give people as a starting point, again, in a very short, very succinct description of the use case, which is what the brief is, we're able to give them the context that they can start to use as their business vocabulary.